Hi, this is Chris with Redden Marine. Today we're going to do the Class 1 double braid splice, or the low-tech splice. And that basically means that the cover and the core both share 50% of the load. The reason why I call this double braid is because there's a rope within a rope, and you'll see that in just a second when I start extracting the core. This splice is used for making soft eyes in dock lines, for going around thimbles, like so, going through snap shackles and bails. If you don't want to add the thimble, you can splice directly to the bail of the hardware, and some fancy halyard shackles like this, where the thimble is actually built into the hardware. All right, this is a nylon double braid, which has more shock absorption, is normally used for dock lines and things like that. It comes in a variety of fancy colors to match your boat. If you're a sailor, you'll probably want to go with the polyester double braid, and that's more for the standard running rigging on a sailboat. All right, so with double braid, you're going to need a specific splice, a specific fid. And this is the fid specifically for 3/8 inch double braid. This is considered a long fid, and this distance right here, which is etched onto the fid, is considered a short fid, and that'll become important here in just a minute. Alright, so this same low-tech Class 1 splice works for both the nylon and the polyester double braids. If you are more of a performance sailor, then you would want to use a high-tech splice, which is the Class 2, and that is where the core provides most of the strength for the splice, and the cover really is just there for chafe resistance and UV resistance. But regardless, we're going to spend our time working on nylon double braid. The polyester double braid are brands like XLS from Samson Ropes that you probably have heard of before. So the first thing we want to do is, because the cover and the core can slide independently, we want to sort of isolate how much of the line is going to actually be sliding. So if we were splicing onto a 600-foot spool, we would still do the same thing by tying a knot onto some sort of anchor point. And that could be a cleat on the dock if you're doing this out on the dock yourself. Or it can be furniture if you're doing it at home, or whatever you do. Luckily, we have a nice workbench here. Some of the tools that you might need: sharp scissors, the aforementioned fid for the specific rope diameter that you're working on, some electrical tape, and this is important. I actually use electrical tape instead of duct tape or any of those other kind of household tapes, because it doesn't leave as much residue on the rope. All right, so the first thing we do is the reason why the fid is so important is because it gives you all the dimensions. You don't actually have to measure anything. The dimensions are all built into the fid. So we're going to go one fid length from the end, and we're going to make our mark. All right? Now the second mark is the eye size. So depending on what hardware you're using, that will determine the eye size. Today we're just going to use a soft eye and not worry so much about splicing onto the rope, but I will make sure to tell you when it's important to put the hardware onto the splice, because it's really frustrating to have a beautiful eye splice and have your hardware still sitting here on the bench. So the second splice, and we're just going to make a quick and dirty little, say, 4-inch eye, soft eye. And what we're going to do is we're going to establish our eye size, and then we're going to add 3 rope diameters for additional milking purposes. All right, and that will be our second mark. And notice that is actually larger than the eye size that we're going to end up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to herniate the core. And this is kind of an acquired skill, but if you think about it, it's like scrubbing a stain out of a shirt. All right, at my second mark, I'm going to scrub that stain until the core starts to pop out of the cover. And various ropes are easier or more difficult to herniate the core. So once I get the core showing, and white cover and white core is a little bit confusing, but I wanted to be able to show you all the Sharpie marker points on the line. All right, so there we go. as you can see, the core is coming out nicely. You've probably seen this happen inadvertently on your line on your boat. All right, so there we are. I'm going to go ahead and pull the entire core out at that mark. I'm going to take my piece of tape and I'm going to tape that core to keep it coherent, and you'll see why that's important here in just a minute. While everything is all laid out here, I've got my original mark. I'm going to scrunch the cover back and I'm going to make the rest of my marks. So the technique here is 2 short fids. Remember we talked about the short fid. 2 short fid marks and then 1 long whole fid mark. And if you can see, I'm making my marks different from each other so that later on I can reference back to the proper marks. Okay, so now that we've made our marks on the core, we're going to attach the fid to the core like so. Take a piece of tape and wrap towards the direction that you want to slide the fid. And that's kind of important so that the tape doesn't jam up in the splice. Now this is the moment where you have to remember to add the hardware. Alright, so this is adding the hardware for the core, but we're not going to do that today. What we're going to do is we're going to make a soft eye. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in at our first mark, and then this is going to establish our eye size. So there we go. Keep in mind that our hardware optionally might be on the splice already. Now we're going to slide this fid all the way up past where the core comes out. That's usually 3 or 4 rope diameters at least. This distance is a large factor in the strength of the core, but it's also a large factor in how difficult it is going to be to milk the splice back together. Alright, so now that the fid is sticking out, I'm going to make sure I did not snag any of the strands on the core by making sure that that still slides. So we're good to go there. Go ahead and wiggle this out. Alright, and now I can take the fid off the core. Alright. Now this is going to start looking a little confusing, so bear with me. Now we've buried the core into the cover. Now we're going to bury the cover into the core. So this fid now goes on the cover, but it's a lot less picky about how nice and smooth it is because the core is designed like a Chinese finger trap. So we have plenty of room to mess around with. So we're going to go into Mark 2. We're going to come out Mark 3. And if you were doing hardware, your hardware would slide on at this point also. Alright, so right up through the Chinese finger trap and right out, and I try to go between the strands so I keep things nice and even. Alright, a little wiggle. That'll come out. I can take the fid off now. Now what we want to do is we have 2 tails sticking out. We're going to pull these in opposite directions and see how that draws up until we hear a nice satisfying pop. And that creates a nice tight cover core joint. Alright? We're going to pinch that and keep that nice and tight throughout the rest of this procedure because this directly relates to how easy this is going to be to milk. Alright, so I'm going to milk the core down over the cover to see how much it's nominally going to swallow. Alright, so at that point I could pinch that out and cut off the extra. So that if I remilked that, it would swallow all that up, but I don't want to do that yet. What I want to do is scrunch the core back, and I want to pull all these strands loose. Alright, nice and straight, and I'm going to cut diagonally across that fan, and that creates a nice taper. Alright, and this is where the scissors, the nice sharp scissors, really come in handy. Alright. Alright, you can kind of see the wedge shape of the trimmings. Alright. So now that's a nice taper. Now once again, pinching the cover core joint, I'm going to milk that back over. And as you can see, now all those guys get sucked back into the core just like we originally intended. Now on the flip side, we're going to pinch the cover core joint. We're going to milk the cover back to see how much core it's going to take up. Alright, So it's going to take up right to about there. So I'm going to pinch it there. And now I'm going to cut this at least a 45-degree angle, if not a little bit more. All right, and that'll form another taper. So now when I milk this back, as you can see, the core will now get swallowed up. And boom. All right, and now I kind of fix the cover strands there, make sure that's not a weak spot in the line. And now we basically have an oversized eye. If we had done the hardware option, the hardware would have been captured on the loop somewhere in the eye, all right? But since we're not doing that, we can go ahead and move to where this is where the magic happens, and this is why we have it mounted. What I want to do is keep this cover core joint nice and tight. I want to keep the core nice and tight because this is going to start sliding back into the standing part. All right, so keeping some tension onto here, or even using the FID to act as a sliding point. I'm now going to reach back to my knot, and as you can see, it's starting to come together. And as soon as we get past where the cover or the core is showing, we have actually created our eye splice. And you can back milk it, and that is the finished double braid splice. All right, so this is our finished class 1 double braid eye splice. It could optionally have been on some hardware, like I said, and you could use the hardware as a tugging point to get the hardware to slide up onto the piece. But another thing that we probably should do is whip this, and we're going to whip this at the throat, and that means penetrating all of the layers of both sets of rope that are meeting here at the throat. And every time we crisscross with the needle and the whipping thread or twine, we add a lot of strength to the splice. I'm not going to go ahead and do that today, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew about the whipping. So you can tenderize this a little bit. If it's a little bit lumpy, the smoother it is, the stronger the splice will end up being. And you can feel that the berry taper goes all the way back here, you know, up the 1 FID length back into the standing part. And then we can go ahead and take our knot out, and then this is actually ready to go for dock lines or for running rigging or whatever you need. So thank you very much.